So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here today with the folks behind Literary Mama. And thanks so much for coming out. Those of you who are tuning in, as always, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into the chat and I'll work them into the conversation. So this is our first time with like a big crew of editors. So this is pretty exciting. Do you guys want to say your name and tell us what you do at Literary Mama? So Cindy, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Cindy DiTiberio. I am the current publisher of Literary Mama. I just took the reins in November of 2021, so I'm still new to it, but really loving it. I've spent most of my career in publishing. I was in traditional publishing as an editor, and then I was a ghostwriter for a while before I started writing my own stuff. And most of what I was interested in writing about was motherhood, so once I started reading Literary Mama, it was really exciting. So when the opportunity came to join, I hopped on board.
That's awesome, thanks. And let's jump to Lolita Pierce, fiction editor.
Hi, I'm Lolita Pierce. I'm the new fiction editor at Literary Mama. And before that, I was an editor in the profiles and reviews department. Is there anything else you wanted to know?
Well, that's great. We'll get to all the specific.
I know there's a lot of people, so I don't want to take up too much time. Okay.
That's great. So Andrea, Lani.
I am actually Andrea Lani, and that's okay. I am a senior editor and the editor of the Literary Reflections department, and I've been with Literary Mama about since 2014, so about 8 years. And Literary Mama is also the place where I had my first publication, so it's
oh, nice,
near and dear to my heart.
Very good. And Rudri Patel.
Hi, I'm Rudri. I am the reviews editor. I've been with Literary Mama for probably about 6 or 7 years. I first joined as the social media editor, did that for a few years, and then jumped to the blog and did that as well. And I've been with reviews for 2 years. And I also, I'm just thrilled to be a part of Literary Mama and all the wonderful women and talent. And it's just a really supportive crew. So I'm thrilled to be here. And thank you, Becky, for inviting us.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks so much for coming out, all of you. So Andrea, I was told you are the history buff of the magazine. So tell us, the journal started in 2003. Is that right? And can you tell us a little bit about the origin of the magazine, why it was started, and sort of like what the landscape for online magazines was at that time?
I will try to answer that. So the origin of the magazine, the journal, came with a writing group that was started in Berkeley, California by Amy Hudock, who you might have heard about. She's published a number and edited and published a number of books with motherhood essays and that sort of thing. And what they did, which is really cool, I wish this had been a thing when on my coast, but she had a writing group where women came together, and it was held in kindergarten classrooms, so their kids were also there. So it was, and they pooled their resources to have childcare. So they were able to write while their kids were being watched. So, like what they said was they didn't have to choose between babies and books. And out of that grew, they wanted to look for places to submit their work. And they found that the quote was, place to publish writing too raw, too real, too literary, too full of big words, and too radical for the typical mainstream motherhood publications. So Amy had a blog, and they started there. It was called Books and Babies, and then that evolved in the fall of 2003 into Literary Mama. And they started just with some free blogging platform called Movable Type. They had 14 members of their editorial staff at that time. And we're coming up on the 20th anniversary next year, and we currently have 24 members of the staff. And none of the original editors are still here. So it's evolved over time, as people's kids get older or they move on to other ideas and subjects, they move on and new people come in, and that makes it really keeps it fresh and exciting. And a lot of those original editors have gone on to do really impressive things in their writing careers and their professional lives. So it's a great, wonderful, as Rudri said, a wonderful community of supportive women and mothers and writers, and and our mission is to really bring that kind of writing, the too raw, too real work to audiences out there. And so we do a lot with, we're not a typical journal where you have to have something publication ready when you send it to us. Often we will work with writers who have, I mean, not always, but if something has a really, has promise, but it's not quite there yet, we will often work with the writer to bring it up to publication ready. It depends on departments and the editors and the amount of workflow, but we really see our mission as more than just printing established writers. We work a lot with first-time writers, and it's pretty exciting.
That's great. And that brings to mind so many questions, but I want to go back to the thing, we were talking about this a little before I hit record, but you guys have 24 members of your staff, which is beyond the pale for most literary magazines. So my first question is why? Why do you need so many people? What do you guys do? And how on earth do you manage to, herd the cats and have meetings and put a journal together with that many different editors? Maybe I'll direct this question to Cindy. Cindy's the publisher, sort of, I imagine, kind of oversees the coordinating of some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of it is because we are a volunteer staff, that we liked for each department to have a couple of editors. So if something comes up, as we all know, sick kids or family members or something's busy at work, you have someone to kind of fall back on to help support you through, maybe you get like 10 submissions that week and there's no way you're going to get to them all. We also like the collaborative spirit, so that if you read something, you're like, I really think there's something here, it needs a little work, you have someone else also to say, what do you think? Am I crazy? Is there something here? So in that way, it's like a sounding board. So most departments have 2 editors. So that's some of it. We also have a lot of departments. We have poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction, reviews, profiles, and then literary reflections. So that's some of it. And then of course we also have a blog and we have a social media editor. So that's some of what bumps it up to that many people. And yeah, we are all over the country. And I was just saying, one of our new managing editors is in France. So it's an interesting process to figure out time zones and how we can meet. For the most part, we give each department a good bit of autonomy. They kind of have their own systems. Not every department works exactly the same. They kind of worked out their own way of reading things, checking their progress. And so we kind of let them communicate the way they want. And then most of our communication is on Google Groups, actually. And so, they'll send, the senior editors do read everything that's going to be published has 2 senior editor approvals required, just to make sure that it's, something that we feel like, yes, this is a literary mama type piece. And other than that, then we all, work together to get the issue published. We now do it 6 times a year. And each department, we can be a little bit loose about how many pieces per department we publish each time too. I think poetry is pretty firm on 7. They get a lot of submissions, so they're often booked up very far in advance. The other ones, sometimes we'll have 2, sometimes we'll have 3. I feel like this most recent, we had like 4 reviews, which is a lot. So we have flexibility on that too, which is the benefit of being an online journal.
Mm-hmm. So while you're here and on this subject, can you actually take us through the editorial process? What happens when a piece comes in? How does a writer identify which department it's for, which genre it's for, who sees it, and then does every editor look at it before it gets published? What is the sort of start to finish there?
Right. So we have different kind of buckets. So like if you're going to write fiction, you're only going to submit it to our 2 fiction editors. And so they will receive it. So we have a bunch of different email addresses. So There have been talk about streamlining our submission process, because if you go to our lovely submissions page, there are like 7 different tabs. So you choose which bucket you're going to submit to. And so it usually goes to that email, and they'll acknowledge receipt. And Lolita and Rudri, you can let me know if I'm not accurately depicting this, but they'll acknowledge receipt, and then, you know, it goes into their queue of when they're going to take a look at it. We do aim to get back to people within 3 months. That's really our goal, because we know how long that wait time can be. And then once an editor feels like there's potential, they'll reach out to the writer and say, hey, we really think this could be great for our journal. Are you open to some editorial feedback? And then they start that process, and that can look different for each department. And then once they've completed their edits with the writer, and then they'll send it to senior editors. So it goes into 2 senior editors on our approval each month. And so they take a look at it. They maybe provide a little bit more feedback. Oh, I like this. Let's think about the title, but generally pretty big picture stuff. And then they go back to the writer and get approvals on whatever the senior editors ask for. And then it gets copy edited by each department. That's another reason why we have 2 editors, and then also a copy editor or editorial assistant for each department. And they'll do the copy editing and putting it into WordPress. And at that point, it's pretty much ready for the next issue when it goes live. So that's kind of the big picture process. Did I miss anything? Any other editors? Okay.
So Lolita, let's say you get a fiction. So first of all, let's start. What are you looking for in fiction submissions? And then I want to touch on this thing that Andrea said, which is really interesting, that you're not necessarily looking for perfection in a piece. So what is it that a piece does need to have that will make you say yes, even if it's not publication ready? Is it the voice? Is it like a specific story you haven't heard yet? Is it the language? So what are you looking for? And also what makes you say yes to a piece when it's not quite there yet?
That's it. I want to try to answer this by being as precise as possible, but it's not always consistent, if that makes sense. So what we're looking for are things that are raw and resonant and risk-taking, that really explore the complexities and nuances of motherhood in an exciting and fresh way, well-written, prose that kind of crosses boundaries and expands our understanding of types of mothers that we're not often exposed to. So we're also seeking actually to uplift voices of motherhood that aren't often heard. So diverse perspectives that cross boundaries, racial boundaries, geographic boundaries, cultural boundaries, language boundaries. So I got a couple pieces that were translated, works of fiction, and that was very exciting. But you know, how do you work with a translator on a piece of fiction? You know, they never really were able to get, I wasn't really able to get responses to that. But we get a couple dozen stories a month. And so what speaks to me is something that is different, that is assertive in its vision and its voice. And you kind of can get that from the first paragraph. Obviously, we want prose that's unique in voice. The voice is really important, but we also want prose that is precise in its language. It's precise in how it chooses to speak and deliver the story. And that's very subjective. That can be subjective from case to case. I don't, you know, I hope that answers the question, but we always want to uplift the writer's vision. And it's often clear when a writer has a clear vision. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the vision changes during the revision process. But we also, like many of our writers have said, we want emerging writers. I don't even read the email that comes with, you know, other than, hi, this is my, and it's submitted in the right format. I go right to the piece. Because I don't care if they've been to an MFA program. I don't care if they've been previously published. I care that the piece is great and it's a good fit for Literary Mama. Those are my 2, you know, kind of focuses.
Yeah. And then while you're here, are you seeing certain trends? Did you see like a lot of motherhood related stories during the pandemic, or like you must see a lot of different phases, collective phases that people are kind of working through. So can you cite some trends that you're seeing people are writing about, or is it not like that at all?
No, there are trends. Sadly, I wasn't in fiction during the pandemic. We got quite a bit of fiction. We got over 100 pieces that year. I joined unofficially in December, but I've only been in fiction really since March. So I'm really new to fiction, really new to Literary Mom. I forgot to say that I've only been there a year and a half.
Okay.
But we tend to get a lot of the same types of stories, and we tend to get a lot of writers from the same class in terms of writers who are able to afford, for example, IVF if they can't have a baby. We get a lot of miscarriage stories. We get a lot of stories about the difficulties of labor. I get a lot of stories about the difficulties of raising a toddler or a teenager. And so within that, I'm looking for excavations beyond the typical tropes of motherhood. Definitely stories that are unsentimental in their approach to motherhood, because motherhood is drenched in sentimentality. And so it's very easy for mother readers to give you that feeling, but you want the prose to evoke the feeling in and of itself. And so I've pulled quite a bit of news stories lately that I'm really excited about that talk about motherhood from other angles. For example, like having an affair, or motherhood through the tropes of mythology from a Hindi perspective, and how who is the official record bearer of stories when stories are told between mothers and daughters. Who owns the story? You know, I kind of have the feeling that as long as your mother is alive, the stories are hers. You know, they're never really, because your mother's always going to say, no, that's not how it happened. You know, there's that mother shadow over your shoulder. So things that explore that really take risks, because you know, our lens is so focused on motherhood that, you know, you really have to have writers who can see into that and have a vision that crosses this boundary, because motherhood really does change the way we think. It's not just about the experience of giving birth or adopting or of raising a child. It's like how that raising of a human being changes who you are, how you think, how you move through the world and your experiences.
And one more question for you. So are you open, or I guess anyone can feel this, but are you open to stories, as you mentioned daughters? So can the stories be written by daughters about their, by sons about their mother, or, you know, can anyone write a story as long as it's related to motherhood in some way, or do you want the author to be a mother?
Yeah, I'd be excited for all of that. There doesn't even need to be a child in the story. If it's about the mother and it's about some aspect of how this motherhood has led us to this story, or the way in which this mother sees the world is related to her experiences of motherhood, I'm open to all of that. And, you know, as long as someone self-identifies as a parent, I've received stories from grandparents who are raising their children. See, that's another experience that we don't often hear of. But we really want to hear from more BIPOC writers. We really want to hear from more LGBTQIA writers. I really want to hear from writers from other cultures, other backgrounds, other socioeconomic classes. We just don't get enough of that. Because I think that all of these experiences of motherhood change the lens through which we see things. So I got a story recently about a mother who was an alcoholic. I mean, there's a lot of judgment around that. And, you know, unfortunately it wasn't publication ready, but I wanted to encourage this author to continue to write about flawed mothers. We are all flawed in some way, but I think mothers are very guarded about the type of vulnerability that they want to share, because we're always infusing biography and autobiography into fiction anyway. And so if this is about motherhood experiences, then we're like, did this really happen? Or, you know, where did this author get this awareness of this? And so that's another reason why I kind of lean into stories that are trying to be vulnerable and trying to take risks and trying to have us fall into some motherhood experience that we haven't seen in this way that the author is sharing with us. So
That's great. Okay, thanks.
And
And
also, can
oh,
I
yeah,
add
go
real
ahead.
quick? We
Please.
actually had a father submit, and our latest issue has a father's poem. And I didn't ask our poetry editor, so I saw that because I was compiling names, and I was like, well, Nick, that is interesting. I wasn't quite prepared for that. And I really should have asked the poetry editors, like, how did you decide that like that was worth putting in there? I don't know, Andrea, did that get discussed at all with senior editors, and it just got approved well before I was a part of things? Do you remember?
I don't have a recollection of that particular poem, although I think I do. I think I was on the approval of that one. And we don't get a lot of submissions from fathers. We used to, historically, when we did 12 issues a year, we had 3 themed issues: Mother's Day, Father's Day, and Desiring Motherhood, which was about infertility or conception, or any kind of ideas around pre-motherhood, I guess. So we would sometimes, kind of solicit things by fathers for the Father's Day issue, or we would occasionally get submissions for that, but it's pretty rare. I mean, I think we're open to it. We sometimes have pieces where it's a daughter reflecting on their mother, or a person reflecting on their mother. But I think historically, like, the voice of the mother talking about her own experience is the one, we've had since time immemorial people reflecting on, like having Freudian, like writing about their experiences with motherhood and blaming them for their problems. So I think overall, we want to hear the voice of the mother, but we definitely, we push that boundary a little bit, and we let the fathers in, and the people reflecting about their mothers in too. But we want to kind of keep the focus as the mother as the protagonist, and what is her voice? Motherhood broadly defined, obviously, with including, like some people mentioned, miscarriage, or wanting to become a mother, or the whole adoption, foster mothering, various ways of being a mother.
Sure.
I think we had a story a couple of years ago in fiction that was from the perspective of a father dropping his daughter off at camp, and how their relationship had changed through the course of her adolescence. So that was a cool story to read, because it's different. And I just want to add that some fathers may have the experience of mothering their children. I know we talk about single mothers all the time. They have to play father and mother roles, even though they can never really be the father. They have to act as both parents. So I'm sure the same could be true of fathers.
It's interesting. So Rudri, can you tell us a little bit about the reviews section and what happens there? How do people pitch reviews? What kind of work are you looking to review?
Yeah, for reviews, I think, we accept, we take queries from, writers who have never written a review, as well as writers who are more established. I think, if you're pitching a review to Literary Mama, you can go to the respective address that Cindy mentioned on our submit page. The book should have some, theme regarding mothers or motherhood. Although, as a review editor, I interpret that it's broad. So it's not like if the book's covering other themes, then, it eliminates that book from consideration. For the most part, when writers are pitching, we ask that they sort of say, why is this book compelling enough for our audience? And give some specifications as to what they plan to cover. In terms of evaluating reviews, I think the book reviews are nuanced, in my opinion. So it's not just about summarizing the book and just bringing a few points. We really want writers to lean into their experience and also compare it to the prose in the book. And I should say that we consider all types of reviews, novels, memoirs, poetry. So it's a pretty broad range of reviews that we consider, but we are looking for the writer's perspective on reflecting on what they're reading and really honing in on why a particular passage spoke to them or could speak to our audience. And I think, you know, a lot of times you hear in fiction and nonfiction, you know, make the personal universal and make the universal personal. I think the same is true with the review. I'm really looking for a review, especially if it's a book that I didn't consider, how that writer can bring that book to life. And as an editor, I want to say, hey, like, this book wasn't even on my radar, but this writer, this reviewer wrote it in such a convincing way that I'm going to, you know, hop on and either go to my local bookstore or get on Bookshop and order this book right now. And so that's what I'm looking for in a review, something that says, this wasn't even something I would even think about considering, but it's bringing a perspective that I think I'd benefit reading.
So that's interesting. It sounds like the review should be sort of a personal essay. It's not like a more technical or academic review of a book and its strengths and weaknesses. It's more like how this book ties into the writer's personal experience.
I would say it's a blend. I mean, you know, we're not, I wouldn't necessarily call a review essay-esque, but I would say that it should blend in backstory from the writer, although we have published reviews where the writer has had some distance, but it is really analyzing the prose and looking at, like, you know, how is this shaping the motherhood experience? How is this shaping the, you know, even a daughter's experience? Just sort of quoting the prose, but going beyond that and saying, like, this is how one should think about it. I think that reviews in terms of edits, we do go back and forth. Like, when I look at a review and I'm preparing it for the senior editors, I may go back to the writer and say, like, you're going to have to clarify here or add more context. And then, you know, then it'll go to senior editors. And sometimes, you know, the senior editors might have additional questions, and then it'll get punted back to the writer. So I feel like, you know, the reviews process is intense, but I think it's in the lens of, like, we're really trying to get the writer to, you know, improve their reflection. And it really is a process. And I think I'm always astonished, like, the first draft versus the final draft and how it's evolved. And it really makes me excited that writers are willing to take that extra step to produce their best work.
Sure. And do you publish negative reviews ever? Like, if a writer really had a bad experience with a book, is that something you would be interested in hearing, or do you want it more positive?
You know, we have had a couple of reviewers who, after reading the book, have said, like, there's really nothing positive I can say about reading this book. And so I'm really not soliciting those type of reviews. If it's a book that doesn't resonate with you, then I don't think Literary Mama is probably not the forum to publish that in, because we want to support other writers, we want to support mothers. And if your experience about motherhood or experience about the book is negative, I'm certain there's other places that book can, that review can land, and it would be welcomed. But we are really looking for, I'm not saying that every book review has to be positive, but it should be constructive. It should be in service of the writing as well as the experience of motherhood.
Sure. Okay. And so question, this might be for Andrea. This is another kind of historical question, though. Anyone can jump in. I'm just curious, since you guys have been around since 2003, which is such a long time, especially for an internet magazine, how have you seen writing related to motherhood change over the years? Are you seeing, I mentioned the idea of trends earlier, like, are you seeing people writing about different kinds of things over the past few years? Or how have you seen motherhood writing evolve over the years?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for it. We definitely, like you mentioned, the pandemic earlier, we did get a smattering of, you know, as in all the, in mostly creative nonfiction and fiction, people addressing the pandemic and just the issues around isolation and homeschooling. And I think we had something in literary reflections on that too. So people are, you know, exploring that specific issue. I think that recently, you know, in the last few years, for a long time, I think the mother blogging idea is kind of tapered off out in the world. So we're getting fewer submissions that are very like perky, kind of bloggy, like here's a cute thing that happened and here's this, you know, what I learned from it in 500 words kind of submission. Where I've seen fewer of those in literary reflections. I only see, as a senior editor, I only see what's been, you know, accepted and is ready for approval. So I don't have the whole window into what kind of things don't make it across that desk. I can't think of any specific like subject areas. I think things are a little like more than changing over time. They're a little bit cyclical, and you know, like time of year and things like that. But I would have to think about it more to really have a good soft answer.
It's interesting though, because you're making me remember there was a time where like the mommy blog kind of surged, right? Was that, I feel like it was the early 2000s where suddenly like every mom was starting a blog. And then we started to see more recently a lot of books of like moms speaking honestly about the motherhood, like, let's be real, you know, this is how hard it is. This was really going on. So it's interesting to sort of like see those trends, but I had totally forgotten about the mommy blog as like a genre.
Yep. I was a member of that.
Yeah, it's very tempting.
I think we've always tried to dig deeper than whatever is kind of trendy at the time and avoid, we've never done advice or listicles or you know, we like didn't dig into like the mommy wars or whatever sort of like trendy like kind of reality show type thing you get in like a parent, like a glossy magazine. So I think we've always searched for, you know, deeper and more real writing. A trend like Lolita mentioned, we're trying, you know, like this isn't a trend, but it's like an effort we're trying to make very slowly and clumsily as we're doing it, is to bring in more voices from, you know, different areas of the world that we haven't, you know, and the communities that we haven't heard from fully before. And so I think that we're not doing that to be like on trend, but because we want to share the, you know, the full scope of the motherhood experience. And you can't do that if you're only focusing on a sort of narrow slice of the public.
Sure. And you mentioned the mommy wars, and this is really a question for anybody, but I know so many issues around motherhood are so heated and everybody has really strong opinions. Are there any topics that you just will not touch? I interviewed the editors of Motherwell and they said there are a few topics they just really like, it's too much, it's too incendiary, and we don't really want to put that out there. But are there topics that you guys come across that you're just like, this is not for us?
For a really long time, we were very, you know, studiously apolitical. Like I had, before I was on the staff, I submitted something that addressed like water quality. And even that was just like, no, this is too political. So, but we have backed off from that recently because we just feel like the issues that affect mothers, you know, like you can call them political, but they're, you know, they're personal, like we can't. Right. So we, you know, we talk about abortion, we talk about a lot of, you know, we don't have like a trigger issue, but we definitely are open to things. But I think if something was coming from a point of view that was not supportive of mothers in general, I think we would we might say no to that. But you know, we take everything on a case-by-case basis.
Sure. And Lolita, I think I saw your hand up, and I think this is a good question for you as a fiction editor. Like, are there things that are just like, yeah, we're gonna pass on that. That right off the bat, and it's not just bad writing, but it's maybe something that's too, like a screed, it's too political, too loaded.
No, I was just gonna follow up with what Andrea said. I love that, she owned that we were apolitical and we're trying to make the shift away from that, because I mean, Toni Morrison, who was a Nobel laureate, said all great art is political. I mean, that's not the full extent of her quote. She went into it more, but that's the key. It has to be art and it has to be great. It can't just be political. And I think that I would reject something that was written solely for the purpose of making a statement, and it wasn't a natural part of the vision of the story. It wasn't a natural part of the story.
Mhm.
And I think that you have to keep in mind that in poetry and reviews and in profiles and all of our sections, what we want is an experience. And so if you're giving us a platform and not an experience, then I think that's where it feels disjointed. It feels like this is not the place for you. This is not the type of platform for you. So in fiction, I'm looking for the human experience, because all of our lives, involve politics. And I think specifically for motherhood, the female body has been politicized. And that was part of the original mission statement as well. It was long, it was like raw, irreverent, ironic. And it was like writing that is too body conscious or focused on the body to be published, because, I know 2003 doesn't seem that long ago, but the politics of the time where we don't want to publish, stories about a woman's graphic childbirth experience, or a woman going to seek an abortion, or a woman who is, struggling with a child in a way that excavates the changes of her body or the changes of her children's bodies. And I think that women's bodies are political. So our writing is political. The fights over our children can be political. So no, I wouldn't shy away from art that is political. I just, want good art. I think we all do.
Do you have any insights in how writers can make that transition from being overly political to actually conveying an experience, conveying something that's personal and deep and doesn't come across as political, but still has political implications?
Yes, I do.
Craft question, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a craft question. I think that a lot of times political art comes from pain. It comes from a disconnection between the way you see the world and the way you think the world should be seen, for example. And so oftentimes there's a wound there that you're writing about, that you're championing. It can be positive, but you want writing that writes over that, not into it. And I think when writing writes into a pain or into a wound, into a political crevice, that's when it fails. It fails to tell a story. It fails to reveal a truth, and it fails to illuminate something. And so that's what I kind of advise writers. I think that what you want to do is to tell them what's the story here? Like, just write that. And all the themes will just come from the excavation of that. And that's why I kind of lean into precise word choice when I'm working with revising an author. Like, word choice is like, I love Flash. We accept Flash. I didn't say that, by the way, up to 5,000 words, but as little as, a few hundred words. Why did you choose this word? What does this word tell us about this character? What does this word tell us about this experience that you're describing? What does this detail add to the piece? And I think once you pull back from the vision or the overarching theme that you have for the work and lean into the actual story, that's when I think the author can bridge that gap. And, I'm happy to send things away that have promise, but it's just too raw and the author's just not able to write about it in the right way right now, and to give them extensive feedback so that they can resubmit to us later. Because maybe with time and distance from the piece, they'll be able to come back to it.
Sure. And do you have repeat submitters? I always want people to hear this, that if they've been rejected, they should not, sulk and, completely give up and never submit to you guys again. Do you have any success stories of people who've been submitting to you for years and years and years, and then suddenly it's a yes?
Yeah. Actually, Aria is one of those stories. I think the story that was just published, the author has been working with the editor on that piece for years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, another story that was in our last issue was a story that was kind of rejected with encouragement to resubmit, and they did. And so it's a very different story now than the story that the author previously submitted. And I wasn't even the editor at the time, and it came back and I was like, oh, I like this story. It still wasn't quite there, but she was able to work with me and transform it. And it's like, it's a third story now, like a different story now. Mm-hmm. So I love giving, I hate to say this, but I actually enjoy the rejections as much as the submissions, because I want to encourage authors with what Octavia Butler said, which is persistence. Mm-hmm. I think that's the key to writing. It's the key to all art, is persistence. That's what separates the people who are just talented from the people who make it. And so I try to read all of our stories with an eye towards, what can I give them in this that will help them to continue their work. Mm-hmm. I don't want to just say this wasn't a good fit. I want to actually tell them what worked and what didn't work for us. Like, what does fit mean? What does excellence mean? Because we're all reading and seeing art through a specific lens. And so I feel like I owe it to them to tell them what lens I'm seeing this through for Literary Mama. Because generic rejections don't help anyone, and it only feed your own mind loop as to this wasn't good. Like, I want to question what I think is good, and I want to question what I think isn't good enough. And so having that considered feedback is very important to me. And I've actually had more writers write back to me after I've rejected them than writers who I've accepted. They're like, this is great, thank you so much. And who gets to thank you for a rejection?
Right. I was actually
feel good that they're going to keep submitting and writing, even if it wasn't a good fit for Literary Mama, that their work is going to be out in the world,
Have you gotten any negative pushback? Because sometimes writers say they don't want, I know that's sort of like a big issue in the literary world. Writers say they don't want the personalized rejection. Sometimes it bothers them. It sounds like your rejection letters are very caring and thoughtful.
I've never gotten that. No, not even when they haven't agreed. So I've gotten, I see what you're saying, and this isn't the kind of story I was trying to write. So I agree. I agree this wasn't the right place. And I appreciate that you read my work anyway. Right. So I get that a lot. No, I've never gotten that, but I've gotten a lot of thank yous. I've gotten a lot of, most people don't, wow, you really gave me a lot of feedback. And most people don't, I'm so happy you read my work. They feel seen, and I don't do it to get that. I'm like I said, I'm new, so I didn't know I wasn't supposed to give a lot of feedback and rejections. I was just supposed to reject, and so I'm reading everything, reading all the stories, and I don't do that as much anymore because I just don't have the time to do that. But even if I'm skimming a story and seeing that it's not right, I'm looking for the light. I'm looking for the little pinpricks of light in the story that I can pull out, as well as, oh, this is where the story really fell for me, or oh, this is where it dropped off and it went somewhere else, or this is where the writing stopped being precise. So I'm looking for both. And then I'm jotting little notes, and then I want to just give them something. Some people get 2-3 paragraphs and quotes from me from their own work, and some people get maybe a paragraph. But I've gotten feedback about both, because I do want their work to feel read. It is supposed to be read by us. Mm-hmm. There is no slush pile at Literary Mama, and so that's important. We're trying to uplift mother artists, and I want that to be reflected in their feedback from us, whether it's positive or negative.
Mm-hmm. That's really sweet. I love that you're like, I just didn't know that I wasn't supposed to give personalized feedback. This is a question for anyone, really. I'm curious. So I was putting together this collection of interviews for the month of May with mama themed literary magazines. And I was struck by the fact that there actually aren't that many. There are a handful of magazines that are more opinion oriented and sort of essay oriented, but in terms of fiction and poetry, I think Mom Egg Review and you guys and a few others, but that's really it. And I'm curious if you have any insight into why there aren't that many. I actually expected there to be a lot more. And it's just, I mean, so many writers are moms, so many moms are writers. It seems like it would be such a big field, but I'm curious why, if you have any insight into why there aren't more mama themed lit mags.
I can try. So I really started getting serious about writing when my two youngest children were born, twins. Gave me a lot to write about. And that was in 2005. And there were a lot. There was Literary Mama, there was Brainchild, there was Motherverse, there was Mother Words, there was Mom Writers Literary Magazine, there was Mama, Hip Mama. And then there were a lot of online ones at that time. And I think kind of, I kept watching all these magazines go out of print before I had a chance to submit to them. So it was a little discouraging. And I think that part of it is it's like a huge amount of work, and that like, so is motherhood, and also whatever you have to do to put food on the table, which is probably not your literary magazine. So I think that the motherhood window, when you really want to be writing about that, is maybe 15 or 20 years. And then you kind of move on to something else, which is what we see as our editors move on. So I think some of it is like bandwidth and time, and some of it is moving on to other subject areas. But I think there's also kind of I want to be optimistic here, that there's a kind of a hopeful element to it, is that I'm seeing in a lot of mainstream literary magazines, which I didn't see 10 years ago, writing with parenthood themes, and people writing, like I'll, pick up Orion or Ecotone or, something, and there will be writing, somebody, a parent is writing about their parenthood experience within the theme of whatever that literary magazine is. And when I first started submitting to literary magazines, it felt like if you weren't like so if you weren't writing something that would appeal to like the 23-year-old interns who were reading the slush pile, like, which was not motherhood, we weren't going to get through. And I mean, obviously some of that was probably my own writing what didn't qualify. So I think that maybe there's more opportunities for this kind of writing opening up elsewhere. But also I also think that it's nice that there are a few places still out there that have this focus, because it's intimidating to go out into the world as like a new mom and you're just writing about something that, some people might consider sentimental or maudlin or, whatever. And that there's a place that work will be respected and helps to, be brought to the level it needs to be published. So that's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's also important when you think about the readers of Literary Mama. So full disclosure, I've had 2 pieces accepted by Literary Mama, which was awesome and wonderful. But I knew in submitting those pieces that it was for mother readers. So there was a sense of who the very specific audience was. And like, this is a piece that I think the audience is going to get. There's humor in it and they're going to relate to it because it's something only like working, struggling moms get. So
I think Becky also, there, as you mother, your child gets older, and then privacy issues come to the forefront. And when you're in the throngs of motherhood, it might be too difficult to write, but then when you do have the time, you as a mother and as a writer, you have to pay attention to your child's needs. And there's some things even in fiction that you may not want to touch. I also think running a literary journal is a gargantuan task. Like we have 24 staff members that put their 110% in, and we've been doing it since 2003. And I think the fact that so many journals start and then stop within 5 years. It's just because there's so many working parts, and you've got to really love your mission, and all of the staff members need to be fully vested for it to continuously run. So I think, I don't think this is just an affliction in the motherhood space. You know, there's a lot of other lit journals that have started and stopped, even some of the great ones, right? And
absolutely, yeah.
When they say it's a labor of love, it really is, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot
just,
just quickly.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
It's okay. But I think what you were saying too, like this, you're so preoccupied with motherhood, and you want to write it all down, and it's all so consuming and so interesting. But during that period in your life, you actually have very little time to write it down. And then by the time you actually have a moment to reflect on it, you've either moved on or you've forgotten all the details of it, and you just want to write about other things. So yeah, so that's an interesting feature of the whole experience. Go ahead, Lolita.
Oh no, I was just going to say, all three of you have touched on what I see also is that you touched on identity, how we identify as writers, and some mothers, you know, don't want to do that. One of my first pieces for Literary Mama was about why I don't write about my children. My mom was always saying, "Oh, write about your children. You should write about your kids. I have so many, and they're so different." But it's like, no, I don't want to write about them. I have my own identity, and I have my own experiences that I want to have reflected in my fiction. So it's that. And then I think that it is boundaries when they get older. And I wrote about that as well. Like, you know, I want to respect that my children are all individuals and creative. And now in the world in social media, they're telling their own stories. They're reflecting their own truths, and they don't want to be seen through my lens, which is constantly kind of, you know, folks zooming in and zooming out because I'm used to seeing them a certain way. So I constantly have to check myself on who they are and where they are in the world, and they want to tell their own stories. So I allow that. It doesn't mean I don't get to tell stories. It just means I have to be respectful of the boundaries about that. And then the third is gatekeeping. And that's what we're all touching on in terms of like, who gets to start these literary journals? Do they have the bandwidth? If they're mothers, current mothers, they're probably juggling a lot. And if not, it's like, you know, is there even interest in it? And I think traditional gatekeeping has kept motherhood stories out of magazines and out of publication because they're run by heterosexual white males, and they don't want to read certain stories, or they don't think that they're worthy, or they don't think that they're literature or poetry or art. And so it's like those gatekeepers, this group of women had to change that. They had to become, you know, part of that gatekeeping and part of that allowing people through the gate, allowing mothering and mother stories through the gate. And that's what Literary Mama's trying to do.
So are there ways for people to get involved with the magazine? Sounds like you already have a pretty big editorial staff, but if people want to be readers in some capacity, volunteers, interns, what kind of opportunities like that exist?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I mean, I think we actually are probably going to be looking for 3 different positions. One is another literary reflections editor. And Andrea can speak a little bit about that department. But it's creative nonfiction, but it's specifically about motherhood and writing or motherhood and reading. So it's a little different than our creative nonfiction, which is more episodic and storytelling. It's actually one of my favorite departments. Every literary reflections piece I just find so relatable, probably because I am also a mother writer. So we'll be looking for someone to join her, because right now she's on her own in that department, where again, we like to have 2. And then we will probably also be looking for another reviews editor to join Rudri. We had kind of a last minute departure. Again, we are a very understanding group of women, and sometimes life intervenes and you can't commit to Literary Mama the way you want to. And then we are also looking for a photo editor. So a photo editor is who helps us place beautiful photographs to correspond with each piece that we publish. So it's a job that's more focused on right when we're getting ready to publish a piece versus we don't really get submissions for photography. It's more just someone who maybe is visual minded and might like to, you know, work with us on like what's a piece of photography that would be evocative, that would go along with our style, that could accompany each piece. So those three jobs will likely get posted on our website in the next month or so. So those are 3 really good opportunities.
Great. So how should people keep up with you guys? So do you have a newsletter, follow you on Twitter or Facebook page? How can people stay in touch and learn more about the magazine?
We have all of those things. We do have a newsletter, and we'd love for people to sign up for that. So we release a newsletter anytime we have a new issue, and also any opportunities like this or special events we're doing. Like we just did our first Mama and Writing Week for Mother's Day. We're on Twitter at Literary Mama. We're on Instagram, Literary Mama. We're on Facebook, Literary Mama. So we're on all the socials. And our blog also has lots of really fun. That's where we do our calls for submission. We post calls for submissions. We posted about this event. You know, we do literary news. We kind of do a circle back to like, where are they now for contributors who've gone on to great success and had their start at Literary Mama. So our blog is also a really great place to stay connected to all things that we're doing.
And are you open for submissions year round?
Year round. We are one of those places that like, we never put a stop on submissions. We welcome them all the time.
That's great. So everybody watching, go to the website, read the blog, read the amazing work on the site, and submit your work and think about motherhood and put your best work out there. So thank you guys so much for taking the time today. It was really great, really informative. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.